I've got my pieces that I stitched together, and if I show you the back of them, where I've stitched it, I've then ironed this flat so it goes into this fabric, and then you turn it over and you iron across the seam as well. You want that seam to be as flat as possible, basically. If you use thread that matches, then you won't see any thread here. I haven't used thread that matches, but as you can see, you can't see lots of it, so I would suggest that whatever thread you've got will be fine. It's also worth mentioning when you lay out your pieces, I didn't think about this before, but when you lay out your pieces, you should think about what direction you want your fabric to go in, and this is where we start to get into quite complex quilting stuff. But if you want your fabric to all go one way, so I have put all of my fabric so that this bumpy line here is always going this way across the fabric. It only really matters if you've got a pattern that is directional, and if you're making a quilt that's just a bit fun with like loads of different patterns, then it really doesn't matter. So this is the bit where we put this section and we pin it to this section. It's exactly the same as what we just did with the squares. The only bit that's complicated is that this line here, so this seam here, this line between the two fabrics, when we put them together, we want it to line up to this line here. And so when we fold it out, we want it to look like a perfect square where all four squares join in the middle. So the easiest way to do that is to take your two pieces of fabric and put them right sides together. So exactly the same as we did with the squares. But this time, and I really hope you can see this, where you've ironed your two seams, so I've got a seam here and I've got a seam here. If I push those two seams together so that they are sort of stuck together, so that they're one up against each other, we call it nesting, if you really want the word. When you put them together like that, I'm really trying to get the right angle so you can see, it means that those two lines there will be joined up, because they're where you've ironed, it's made a sort of little ridge, and that little ridge will guide you to tell you that it's straight. And then what I do is I take a pin, and the first pin that I put in is to keep those two seams in the right place. And then I do the ends. So this is exactly the same as it was before with the squares. I put a pin in the end, and I tend to put one in the middle as well so that you can keep it really straight. And then I'm going to pin at this end. The more eagle-eyed amongst you will realise that my squares aren't completely the right size. You can see just on the inside there, they don't quite join up, but my lines sort of join up, and I can fudge that so that it goes straight across. So it doesn't have to be, you know, exact when you're working this kind of way. So then I've got my 6 pins that go across my line. I take my needle, take my thread. So this is exactly the same as it was before with the squares. I go in on the line, I make a double stitch, same as before. When I get to the middle seam, so you can see I'm right over the middle seam where that middle pin is, I like to also do a double stitch there, because it makes it really secure, because you don't want that to move. If you don't do a double stitch there, it's not the end of the world, it doesn't matter, but I like to do it just to make sure that it's really secure, so that you can, it's not going to have a little gaping hole. And then you keep going. So then, when I pull my 4 squares out, what you should hopefully see now is that those bits in the middle line up. So you've got a line that goes straight across, and you've got a line that goes straight across. So on the back of that, when I iron it, I'm going to iron all of my seams over to one side, then iron on the front to make it as flat as possible.